without further ado, I'm going to bring on our special guest tonight, the playwright Lauren Gunderson, many times over award winner, often heralded as America's most produced contemporary playwright. Um, I made the comment, I have no idea if it's true, earlier, that she's probably also America's most produced playwright during the pandemic, because The Catastrophist, which I hope you all have had a chance to see, if not soon, is actually being presented by at least 10 different theaters this spring across the country. And we're particularly proud to be partnering with two of our new play colleagues in this country, Marin Theater Company in California and Roundhouse Theater outside of DC, members of the League of Resident Theater family and folks that we certainly know really well. And so when they reached out with this project, we were immediately got our hand up in the air saying, yes, we will sign up. We cannot wait to share this work and to share Lauren's voice again to everyone in Pittsburgh. You'll remember Lauren a couple seasons back. We did her terrific play. We kicked off, I think, our 2018 season with The Revolutionists, which folks just loved and we loved producing, and we did, I think, a fine job doing it. So Lauren, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to hand the reins over to my dear colleague from our artistic team, Ms. Claire Drobot, our Associate Artistic Director. I'm going to get out of the way. Claire, take it from here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, James. Thanks for the great introduction. And Lauren, welcome. It's strange that we can't have applause, but everyone can hold up their hands, give you some Zoom applause.
Everybody,
thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, great gift to be here.
So I thought, today we just have a chance to maybe talk about the evolution of this play, especially and also what it's like writing in a digital moment where we can't be live. So for our audience members, the Catastrophist is a beautiful, moving piece that follows Nathan Wolfe, who also happens to be your husband, who is a virologist, and it takes you through his career and also kind of how it parallels his personal life. So I'm wondering if we could start at the beginning to say, how did this play come about?
Yeah, I mean, the joke between Nathan and I is that we were kind of set up so that I would write about him and I married him instead. So in some ways, the play has been a long time coming. But Nathan was introduced to me because before I met him, I'd been writing about science since I knew I wanted to write plays. So the first play I wrote was about me and being Southern and my crazy family. And then the very next play was about science and a scientist. So I've kind of been alternating between those two.
Merged a little.
And this one is a merge, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it in some ways I thought I would never write about my spouse. I think most, not a ton of writers do, or if they do, they're very cloaked, but this was very obvious. And there's something about this pandemic moment, and the director of the piece, Jason Menadakis, is also the artistic director of Marin Theater, where I'm the resident playwright, thanks to the Mellon Foundation. And he reached out a couple of weeks into the shutdown and was just like, would you ever maybe write about Nathan, seeing as how it's very topical what he studies? And I kind of was like, nah, probably, I don't know, that seems like a bad idea. But I think a couple of things happened to kind of shift my aesthetic and my perspective. And one is we're on Zoom. Everybody's in everybody's homes. And that forced intimacy where we are right up next to each other. We are actually making weird eye contact or facing forward in ways that, but we're seeing homes and kids and pets and pajamas, and the kind of facade is stripped away a little bit into people's personal lives. And so I thought, well, this is pretty personal. My personal life includes this fascinating human and my husband. And also there was just such epic bravery all around me, and essential workers of all sorts, and people just saying, this is not a time to be pretty or fancy or perfect. This is a time to be honest and be personal. And so I thought, I don't know, maybe the minimum I can do is tell this personal, true story, and let theater do what it does, which is to animate and enliven and deepen and challenge and all of that, but to kind of come back to the source. And yes, it's scary and it's weird to be open, but it's also like, I don't know, everybody else is being real brave. This is like minimum bravery for a writer. So yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's very, very brave. And I'm curious too. So knowing that you were writing it during the pandemic, how did you kind of come about the physical aspects of it? So it's shot beautifully. It's in a theater, you know, and yet it acknowledges that there's a camera in the room. That this is somehow a hybrid piece.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted it to be theatrical. That was my standards. Like, if we're going to do something, I want it to be safely, but you know, can we see the theater space, that wonderful empty space that we fill and we recognize, and I was so nostalgic for, because it's magical. That just the space is magical, and so knowing that we wanted to do that again, do that safely, but have that be a part of the storytelling, and then it was a question of kind of like, well, there's a lot of ways to tell a story about any human. And frankly, any person on this call in this world could have a play like The Catastrophist written about them. You don't actually have to be a TED Talk, you know, CNN, smartest person in the world kind of person. I think that's part of what I knew was true, is that what actually makes Nathan's story worth telling is that personal resilience and those sorrows and triumphs, and how close we can get to fatherhood and loss and all those things that so many of us share. It's, yes, he's very smart, but the play could be written without mention of viruses or science at all, and it would still, I think, be mostly the play that I intended. So anyway, all of those kind of combined to figure out how can we use the power of film and the surprise of it, but also the heart and soul of theater. And the truth is, I didn't write, I've been asked a few times, which I think is a great question, is it a screenplay or is it a play? And I wrote it as a play, knowing that the conversation would be built with a cinematographer, our wonderful director of photography, Peter Rocco. But Jason and I, the director and I, basically treated it as a play. We're gonna make a play, we're gonna do what we know how to do, which is make a play and make that as good as we can. And then the editor, cinematographer, camera geniuses told us what the options were, what film language we can use to indicate anxiety and stress and surprise and wonder. And so it really was this interesting conversation between two mediums, which I'd never done before. None of us working on this had ever done it. So we're, as we say, building the boat while sailing it.
Right, but it's exciting. You got the innovation of creating a new medium as you're working on it. So I'm wondering, what was your rehearsal? I want to circle back to the personal in a second, but what was your rehearsal process like? How do you know? We went through the same of having in-person rehearsals, and it's completely different from the normal. Like, everyone gathers around a table, there's shared snacks, you're all in this, you know, communal space. Kind of have to rip all of that away. What was your process like?
Yeah, I mean, it was similar, except on Zoom, you know, and we had this one actor so that we didn't have to worry about the overlap of Zoom, and how for a lot of plays, certainly plays that I write, I want that speed and that pace and that peppering of dialogue. And it's really hard to do that over Zoom just because you keep getting cut off. But in one person play, he is controlling the tempo and the comedy and the pace and all of that. But yeah, we were never all in the same room even once. So we were all Zoomed out. And then, of course, right before we were to all be in the theater together to shoot, San Francisco went into a more severe lockdown. So we had to eliminate unessential people, which I was one. So I can zoom in and watch all of the camera feeds. They made it so that I could watch it in real time from here.
From your attic.
Yeah, from the little blue attic.
Strange to be so removed, but it's also beautiful. I think there's something really haunting about how empty the theater feels in the piece. You know, and that kind of brings me to another point. I see we have a question in the chat that I'll get to in a second, but you know, a lot of your plays have a meta-theatrical element where you're calling out the fourth wall and you're acknowledging that. How did that inform this process and the structure of subtitles within the piece and being able to actually play with this new medium?
Yeah, it's so interesting because The Revolutionists has that as well at the end. And that moment of realizing you have an audience should be kind of chilling to our main character, and hopefully that ripples out to the audience, the kind of like, oh, this was happening all along. It's kind of the opposite in this play because there is no audience, but he's in a theater. So at a certain point, the play and the character are kind of battling for control. So it's almost like the play says what scene it is and gives a clue about what's happening, and the character either accepts or rejects that and moves on. So some of the time when that final scene starts to flicker, but the character is like, nope, nope, not yet. So he wins that one. But then more often the play wins and says, no, we got to talk about this. We're headed right to this thing and we got to get ready. So I was just fascinated by that idea because I didn't understand it. And you're not supposed to write plays like that. You're certainly not supposed to put the playwright in the play. It's just all of it's like not everything was telling me like, this is, I don't know, this seems either like a great idea or a very bad idea. But you follow those instincts. Like, why is that? Why can't you? And certainly now in the world, all the rules flew out of the window with pandemic and racial reckonings and insurrections. And, there were no rules anymore. So I thought, well, certainly art doesn't need all those rules if we're getting at something heartful and truthful, however art manages that. So I kind of said yes to the wildness of structurally having the play have a voice and having the character not even want to be in their play, not even know what they're doing in the play, and have them flow. So in some ways, what we realized is at the beginning of the play, the character is all science and knows that science can solve things and kind of makes fun of art, teases art, yeah, story, And then at the end, what we see is this very scientifically minded person let go and art takes over and give over to the art and say, I don't actually know how this is going to end, but this play seems to, and I don't like that I don't have an answer, but I'm going to just kind of like the scuba diver in him, hold your breath and jump in, which that to me felt like, well, that's a human arc there. Who knows what's in between those 2 points, but we'll find out as we write it. So.
No, and it's so beautifully structured, watching that journey. And it's interesting that you mentioned the playwright, because in essence there is a second character. It's just one we never meet. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, is this Nathan's play or is it the playwright's play?
I think he would probably say it's my play, and I would probably say it's his play. He's the first to say that is certainly a characterization of him, because I needed that character to do and say certain things to make the play go, that I think in real life he would have either had much longer answers for or much more beautiful or complicated. But yeah, that's one of the things that, again, I leaned into, was to say, like, I don't know how a playwright is in their play if they're not a character, but I love finding out. I don't know what this will amount to, but something about the camera and the behind and in front of the camera felt interesting to play with. And I hadn't thought about it until you just asked that question, but the idea of who's behind the camera, who's in charge, who's telling you what to look at, because it's a film. In a play, you get to look at whatever you want as an audience member. The director can maybe have the character wave the hands over here, but you don't have to look at it. But in a film, you are pointed. And there's something about that all-powerfulness that felt really interesting. Again, to a person who's used to being in power because they're so smart and they have a plan for things, and there is science and theory that you can fall back on, and to have the art go like, yeah, but I still got the camera, so you can theorize all you want, but you are not in charge, sir.
Right, you're being directed.
Yeah, and how interesting that is. So in some ways, I certainly think it is what you're kind of watching as a playwright writing the play. And saying, well, let's take this scene. Oh, the character does not want to be in that scene. Okay, what do I do? Maybe I'll do this scene. Okay, I'll give him a little space here, but not here. This scene, I'm like, no, show up, talk about this, tell me what you know. And that felt really kind of interesting. I mean, the whole idea of this started with that one line, "My wife would like you to know," which as soon as I let myself type that out, I was like, okay, whatever that is fascinating. I don't know what that means, but let's have that be something. And again, sometimes if you don't let your editor edit you quite so quickly, you might find something.
Well, and it works on so many levels too, that suddenly you think you're in control of your emotions, but you're not. And we all have those voices in our head that we hear when it's like, oh, this ties to this, and and this kind of threads through the play.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, kind of along the same lines. I'll take the question from Norton in the chat of how much editorial input did Nathan have on the play?
He basically was like, I'm an open book. And I was like, well, you sure? Like all the way open? Even this chapter? And so he knew what I was doing, but I did not let him read it until, or experience it in any way, really, until the first day of rehearsal when the actor read the whole thing through. That's kind of usual first day of rehearsal protocol. Because I wanted Nathan to have kind of access to it as an audience member,
Sure.
as opposed to worrying about, anything else. But I did a ton of interviews with him, which is kind of odd to interview one's husband, but I encourage all of you to interview your spouses or friends, because you never know what you find. And so there was a lot of interesting stuff I'd never thought about or asked him or had him specify. I kind of presumed or assumed, and then to say, but what does it actually feel like when what is your eureka? What is that? How's that sit in your body? What is it? Are you nervous? Are you like crazy excited? Are you jumping up and down, or are you somber? I don't know. So, answering those questions. And then the editorial stuff was really, as you might imagine, a lot about the science. The first reading, he's like, okay, some science clarifications. And a lot of it was less correcting a fact and more kind of correcting the metaphor. It's less like a tree. It's more like a bush. It's less like a stream. It's more like a waterfall, or, correcting those kinds of artistic flourishes that I put in, that he's like, actually, which I think that's fabulous. And it's perfectly in line with our relationship. And then there's a couple of stuff at the end. I think the stuff he had the most editorial conversations about was when the journalist accuses him of botching the Ebola, and his colleagues of that Ebola, because that was, and still is. I mean, he's over it, but it's hard to get over that kind of direct attack. And so that was the territory I had to wade kind of softest into, to figure out how to say that right, how to tell it right, how to come at it. Yeah, that's tough stuff. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I'm also curious too, one of the things that's so beautiful about the play is it seems so about the world we're living in now, and yet it's set in the past. We're talking about 2006 and 2014. So I'm wondering how sort of the ideas, both life in the pandemic, but also kind of current political climate in which you were writing, that pressure, that idea of fake news and how journalism can twist a story. How did that influence the script and the choice not to directly address the present?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at the very first draft was like, how can we not address this? So, and part of what made me lean into the idea was waking up to Nathan in January of last year and him going, this is bad. This looks bad. I'm going, what are you even talking about? And then, on and on. So, but it felt more like the audience is going to bring that. We're all living that. We're bringing it with us. The play doesn't need to actually talk about that, to have COVID in the room, in your brain. And, you're making connections that I don't need to make for you. Yeah. And to me, it's that question of trusting science. It's the Fauci of it. And really kind of listening to the way that scientists think and talk and communicate, and there's nuance, and it doesn't necessarily fit the perfect political message all the time, but we gotta give them the mic as opposed to anybody else. So.
Yeah, no, and I think it does so beautifully that you feel these deep resonances, but it's never on the nose, and I'm wondering also to just kind of to shift to a different aspect of the production, and for all of our audience members, please feel free to add questions in the chat. So we'll open it up and take a pause in a minute. You can raise your hand, and if you want to unmute. But I'm wondering too, for William, who plays Nathan, did they have a chance to meet, or is it a whole what was that process like? 'Cause that's obviously a lot of pressure playing the playwright's husband.
God, I know. And when I asked Bill's a friend of mine, and I'm just I just adore his work and his spirit and ethic and everything. But then I was like, hey, would you be in my new play? And he was like, oh, it sounds great. Who's my character? And I was like, oh, my husband. Sorry, did I mention that? That's not weird at all, is it? But he was so game and so good, and he has had such experience on film and TV that he brought to this very particular show. So he didn't even know he was doing it, but I kept being like, wow, the way you're pivoting from like theater acting to film acting, even within a line, is really great. He's like, am I doing that? That's good. Hopefully I'm doing it right. But anyway, yeah, they did get to meet. We went on a walk in the Marin Headlands, masked walk, once, twice. And then they've only ever chatted on Zoom. And I think, he studied the TED Talks and other stuff like that. But yeah, and what a great guy. And it's so funny. If you look at pictures of these two, of Nathan and Bill, they look identical when they were like 12. It's hilarious. Same glasses, same hair, same face. It's amazing. So in some ways he was born to.
You found the perfect casting, and it's such a moving performance.
Oh, he's so good.
And I think the other element that's in it is the balance between the science and the personal. So I'm wondering, especially for, I don't want to give anything away for audience members who maybe haven't watched yet, but you're dealing not only with familial health issues, but also with very personal health issues. What happens, the idea of physician heal thyself. So, what was the balance of striking that and how deep did you decide to go into things left unsaid to loved ones?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose of theater, is to say the stuff we haven't said yet, to say the stuff we're too scared to say, to face the stuff that is really complicated and hard to face if it's in real life. I think theater is kind of practice for living. It's, my friend Bill English out here in the Bay Area calls it the empathy gym. You go to work your empathy muscles out. So when things happen to you or stuff, people that you love, you've seen a play that talks a little bit about it or can help you make a leap to one idea to another. So anyway, in that spirit, it felt like, well, let's tell the truth. Let's tell what's going on. And in theater, everything's a metaphor for something. So the idea of Nathan's history, his family, his body, what he studies is all a metaphor for kind of this moment that we're in. And how do we prepare for a future we don't want to prepare for? How do we, as a country, right, as a world, as an institution, as a city, there's so many times when we go, I know we should, but it'd be so much easier if we don't have to talk about that right now, or deal with that right now, or move on, or let's distract ourselves with this. So that's kind of where it felt like, let's go all the way. And see
and it goes to a very, just a deeply resonant place. So I'm curious from our audience members, I want to just open things up. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put something in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask Lauren a question, it'd be great to know what you're thinking.
Anything.
May switch our view around so we can see everybody. Yeah. I think it's strange for Zoom talkbacks, right? It's always the first person. So anyone have a question?
I'll ask a question.
Thanks.
What was it like for you? I mean, obviously these were all things that you experienced with your husband as they were happening. What was it like for you to then watch that on stage, and did it change your perspective on some events that had happened to you as a couple?
Yeah.
Back to you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, again, if you read the script says nothing about all of the visual images you see. So the whale and the kids and me, which was, I almost objected to that one, but I had to kind of let go. But the idea that what we're seeing, how that filmically takes over. And so that was the stuff that was, I think, most surprising to me, because again, I didn't write that. It's open to interpretation in a staged version, which we certainly I hope to see Bill do this on stage one day, but how different will that feel? And so that was kind of some of the stuff that was surprising about it. And surprising about the thing that always surprises me as a playwright is what audiences get out of it and what it brings up for them, and the stuff that they often share, which is, I'm really grateful for those folks who do. And there are so many people who have said this reminds them of their husband or themselves or their father, or, on and on. Again, because I think we're a lot more alike than we might feel, certainly with big events, the life and death events and stuff like that. So that's always, it's never a bad thing to not feel alone in something. So I think that was part of it too. And I will also say one thing that was really interesting was Nathan's response. So he saw it once at the beginning of the rehearsal, and then not until the opening night, the opening screening of it. So we hadn't seen anything. And, you know, it's interesting what he took away, which I hold quite dear, is a lot about the Judaism of the piece and how meaningful it was to see and hear that. He didn't kind of expect that part of it, which I kind of kept questioning him about, like, you read that, right? And you saw it, and we went through all this stuff together. And there was something really, really important. And it may have been the time in which he saw it, or I don't know, but it's I was quite gratified to have been able to tell that story. I'm not Jewish, and so knowing this history and these traditions were new to me through meeting Nathan's family and experiencing it together. So that was really it's very meaningful to me, and it felt in some ways a Valentine's not the right word, but a way to honor Nathan's dad, Chuck, and Nathan's family, who have been through so much, but also given so much.
And I think it's so beautiful the way you weave in to Kumalam, like the idea of healing the world into the play, and how that the tradition, you know, threads through. There's a question in the chat, and I'm curious, you know, to know. Talking about the ending, about this moment where we're left at the end, what were you sort of hoping in there is a lot of possibility at the end to take away. So can you talk about how you came about with that ending?
Yeah, I mean, the specific moment in time is that he is okay. So in the moment of the ending, he realizes he's okay. He doesn't know all the things of that. But so there is, one could say, a happy ending, but I think your audience member is right that we certainly know what's coming. And in some ways it feels good to have Nathan still there because we know what's coming. And, you know, so I certainly wouldn't intend to feel terrible or weighted or like, oh no, but kind of like, we need all the help we can get. We need every scientist like him on board. So in many ways, the play kind of wants you to leap over COVID and think about the next one. And now we can stop the next one, which Nathan assures me there will be one. So, so how do we start listening to those scientists that we haven't before that got us in this mess?
And I think that sense of dread is something that maybe we've all newly discovered in this moment. Sandy Solomon, I believe you had a question from you.
Well, a comment. We watched it together, and as a married couple with a very long relationship, over 50 years, there were so many points in the piece that we stopped and we talked about that issue that was raised, and we're also Jewish, so that dynamic was there too. And I actually wonder if this particular play is almost better done via video, where you can talk during the actual play rather than what we typically do with a play, which is after.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Kind of love that idea. I mean, it is interesting. That's one of the many things that I think is quite valuable about this new streaming kind of high-end theater idea, which we're all still figuring out what to do with and what it means. But I love that idea, the idea of like pausing to discuss.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to think about this play in performance, because what does it mean to have a full audience as opposed to lack of audience? So in the filmed version, it's an empty theater. What does it mean change? How does the character even look out? Does he see the audience? Does he not? That's stuff that we didn't ask ourselves in this version, but we certainly will have to next time. But I love your idea. That's really cool.
No, it'll be fascinating to see how it would live in stage. Ken, got a question.
Sort of feeding on what Sandy just said. Actually, I took notes during the play, pausing it and writing down lines that I thought were very meaningful. I'm a physician, but I'm in the arts, in peripherally, and I saw the dichotomy between the two, and the idea of the certainty of science, the uncertainty of everything else. I also went through a medical issue very similar to what your husband did this past year. So it's like my jaw dropped and I had to just really stop and just sort of put it all together. So I thought it was really impactful from that point of view. And I share the idea that sometimes you hear something in a play and it goes by and you can't remember it. But as I said, I wrote down lines just to save that had a lot of personal connection to me and sort of to think about at a later date. So I really appreciate
that's
that
really cool.
aspect of it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great.
I'm wondering, in what I'm sure is not at all pointed question, but James has asked if you can talk a little bit about the effect of COVID on the field. So, obviously, digital productions are one issue, but at large, how has COVID affected your writing year?
I don't know. I'd love all of us to talk about that. If this were a cocktail party, we would go around the room. I'm enthused because I think theater has had some time to think about things. I am very sad for all the artists who have lost so much in terms of finances and livelihood, and that's something we all have to work very hard to help get back. But I think as an industry, there's been some time to think about how we do things, why we do things. And this is not just, of course, COVID, but Black Lives Matter, and we see White American theater and all of these incredibly important movements that allow us to examine. So the idea, the overlap of those two things, of the pause, the terrible pause, and we have a lot to think about, I think is making a lot of theaters that I work closely with better. And so that when we come back, there is a lot of new strategy and philosophy and thoughtfulness, which is great. And I'm often thinking of so that's not really talking about my process. I don't know. I'm a busybody, so I just have to keep making things and writing things and pitching things, and no rest. But in a chosen kind of way. But I also I think of what my colleague Eric Ting, who's the artistic director of California Shakespeare Company out here, said early on in the pandemic. I was interviewing him and was just like, "So are we gonna, with all of this, we're going back to super small plays," which I actually write super small plays. So I'm like, usually my plays are 3, 2, 1 characters. I have that aesthetic. So that doesn't freak me out, but it thought like, oh man. And Eric was just, I think, really right on when he said, when this is over, I think we're going to want the biggest theater we can get. Like, what is the biggest, most gorgeous spectacle kind of theater? To hit every emotion and feel all of those feels. Not that a small play can't do that, but I'm really interested about that. I think that in some ways, given artists a crisis, and we'll give you 10 versions of a solution and how to come back really strong in all these different ways. So I think as soon as it's safe to open up, we're going to be in a banquet of beautiful theater of all shapes and sizes, which I can't wait.
It's a true chance for reinvention. I think you see it in the digital innovation that you've seen, but also, what happens when we reopen our doors? Can we be a more equitable field? Can we continue to reach new audiences and bring them into the fold with those that already exist? It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any hands out there? I know we have a comment from Ulrike in the chat saying that she loved the science at the heart of the play and wants to read Nathan's book.
Nathan's book is good. It's kind of spooky though. It might freak you out because there's a lot of like, oh God.
Can you give a shout out? I don't have it in front of me. Can you give a shout out to the title in case anyone else wants to pick it up as a companion piece?
Yes, it's called The Viral Storm, a Dawn of a Pandemic Age. And it's the age that's the spooky part, because this is not an isolated event we're in, alas. But we can do a lot of things to help mitigate that risk and make ourselves more resilient. So that's a reason to read the book.
Absolutely. Education is part of that process.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering maybe then to close this out, kind of two final questions, unless anything else pops up in the chat. But looking at the next generation, you have two children, as we learn about in the play. I'm guessing they're a little too young to have seen this, but do you think you'll share this with them at some point in time?
Yeah, I think yes, we will. They are 4.5 and 6. They're a little on the young side, but
it's a little serious.
they know Uncle Bill, and we kind of tried to explain that Bill's daddy, but not daddy, but he's playing daddy. It's very weird. Never mind. Just okay. Well, we'll talk about this later. But at some point, I think they will hopefully find it as a gift to them as well, to know their dad in a different way and to know their grandfather specifically, which is of course the hardest part that they didn't get to meet. But anyway. But yes, one day we'll.
No, it's such a beautiful gift, and to share maybe that window of things left unsaid, because it's different when you hear it written down in a new facet. Yeah. And so then, as we look to the future, right, the process, there's sunshine outside, the possibly brighter future. What's next for you? What are you working on now?
Yeah, a bunch of different things of all different sizes. Again, with the pause, there was, I think writers did not have a pause, because suddenly everyone's like, great, that thing we talked about years ago, let's start writing it now. So all of a sudden a bunch of projects popped up with different folks who are suddenly ready and free to work. So a lot of collaborations, a lot of musicals. There's a musical adaptation of one of my favorite novels, The Time Traveler's Wife, that I'm adapting into a musical for the UK, in the UK, which is picking up now. There will be, I can't say just yet, but there will be a big regional theater production of my musical Jeanette, which is about Jeanette Rankin, the first female congressperson in American history, and the right to vote. There's musicals about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm like the feminist lady musical writer. So all of them are.
We need more feminist lady musicals. I feel like I co-sign that 100%.
That's my jam. So yeah. And then, a bunch of, I just end up writing a lot of musicals these days, which is funny because I did not have Nathan's history of seeing musicals as a kid. I thought they were quite silly until later on. And I was like, oh no, these are great. So anyway, a lot going on, a lot of collaboration, which is my new happy place. I spent a lot of time writing plays as a writer, and I still love those ones, but so much new stuff writing in conversation with somebody else. And the last one is my colleague, Margot Milcon, and I, we've written the Miss Bennett plays. We have our third and final one that we're debuting hopefully soon, as soon as those theaters open up. So a lot coming. And, a lot of my thought process too is leaning into this next generation, and how do we support these younger writers, and how do we support a diversity of writers from a lot of backgrounds, and, attention and clout that I may have, and be able to kind of reflect that onto them, or reflect them through me to other institutions, to keep those voices kind of coming and strong, especially coming out of this pandemic. How do we make sure that we're hearing all the diversity of this weird, wild nation?
That's so perfect. I mean, it sounds like you have a very full slate of writing, and all wonderfully exciting. So we look forward to continue to sharing that. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's really just been wonderful getting to chat. The Catastrophist Runs, we're excited to announce that we're actually going to extend through April 9th. So we very in demand. It's just wonderful. We hope, if you haven't watched it, please hop onto City Theater's website, that I'm sure someone will pop into the chat. And just a huge thank you also to all of our staff and colleagues for joining us tonight. Thank you, Nikki and Joel, for running the back end. I'm James and Montez, and I'll toss it to Mark Masterson, our artistic director, to close us out for the night.
What a wonderful conversation. It's great to see you, Lauren, and you're just adding so much to the national creativity and in this incredibly challenging time. Thank you for sharing your work with us, and for your time and your wisdom. It's deeply appreciated. And I want to thank everyone else on this Zoom call for joining us and chiming in with your questions and your thoughts and your thoughtfulness. It's wonderful to join together in these moments and to create community in the way that we can right now. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone. It's really wonderful to be with you in this virtual space.